Hi,
How are you today?
I am well. And
Good.
yourself?
I'm great. Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too.
Where are you located?
Los Angeles,
City of Angels. Cool. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri.
Kansas
So
City.
excellent. What's that painting back there?
That's a painting of a dream I had,
Wow.
um, where a woman's body was moving a red dress, but there was nobody inside it.
Interesting.
And a woman's voice was chanting as if she wanted me to remember this dream, saying red dress medicine over and over again.
Did you do that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, there had to be a meaning to it. It looks awfully modern and avant, but it seemed like there was a meaning behind it.
There is, and many women have had dreams of the red dress.
Yeah.
It's kind of a collective archetypal energy. There's an artist in Canada that hangs empty red dresses in trees for missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Okay.
I didn't know about that when I had the dream.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes ignorance is bliss. I mean, it just adds, it illuminates it. But yeah, psychologically, yellow and red are the ones that are signifiers. I mean, it's the fire engine color and all of that. So yeah, that's interesting. Well, I love getting into the whole psychology of the mind and how all of this works. So I'm looking forward to getting into it. So thank you for taking a minute out.
Sure, my pleasure.
So I want to begin our conversation with something that jolted our psychology as a world in a very specific way, and that was 4 years ago. We were watching this pandemic rage, and I'm curious how you survived that time period and how it changed the way that you lived your life.
Well, it was profound as it was for many of us. I was fortunate that I didn't lose anybody super close to me from the virus, at least not during the raging of the pandemic. Um, I went from, I was telling stories at the Moth in Los Angeles, and the day that we began to go into sheltering, I didn't go. And so it was like this momentum that I'd had as a storyteller was beginning to unfold, and whoosh, it stopped.
Yeah.
And within 4 days, I'm a psychotherapist, I moved all of my patients online and began working virtually like we are.
Yeah.
And adjusting to that was huge. I had surges of anxiety of how was I going to connect with people when it felt like I was watching them on TV, and how could I connect empathically and would I be effective? And at the same time, my husband, who's a physician, was working virtually as well. And so we were both in the house most of the time and really went outside to walk the dogs for quite some time. And what it did for me that I've finally come to understand is it drove me inside and gave me permission to be an introvert.
Yeah.
My whole life, I was the oldest of three daughters. I had to be an extrovert in order to survive in my family. And introversion was at first very anxiety provoking and then a tremendous relief that drove me inward into taking courses with advanced dream work, um, and and then writing this book. I joined a writing cohort of about 100 people online, and somebody commented on my work saying, "I think you're writing a poetic memoir," and that's what I've written.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So does it feel cathartic to have done that?
Tremendously so. Yes, I've learned to call it soul retrieval, that I've retrieved parts of myself that were left behind in various kinds of trauma that I didn't I knew how to access them intellectually and therapeutically, but when I began to access them in an introverted dream time, poetry arose. And I've been a poet since I was 8, but it wove together a story that gave me back me. When we're traumatized, we push stuff down. The unconscious says, I've got this. Hurry up and go on with your life. I'll hold this for you. And eventually, trauma compounds on itself when other things happen to you, or you volunteer to have things happen to you. And it takes a lot of energy to hold that down in the unconscious. I liken it to holding an inner tube underwater. A lot of energy going on holding that stuff out of consciousness. And when it arises, at first it's excruciating. And then all that energy is free for life force, for creativity, for loving and engaging and having energy. So it was a tremendous gift to me while it was a curse to a lot of people.
It seems to me as though having a poetic spin on writing your story with trauma in it is like a lubricant against having to really look in the mirror I mean, you have to look in the mirror, but it almost seems as though the poetry kind of saves your inner child a little bit.
It saved her, but it also gave her a voice to say things that were not okay to say.
Yeah.
There's parts in that book that are so vulnerable that part of me, as I allowed it to come out into the world, I wanted to pull it back and just say, oh dear, this is just so naked, so very naked. But I find that, as with everyone else that I've worked with, the more naked we get in our honesty about who we are, the healthier we feel.
And ultimately, those are the only ones that win the Oscars at the end of the year. I mean, really, you got to take sometimes you got to take that ice dagger to the heart because that's the way living this life is sometimes, you know.
Yes,
So
yes.
let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day. And one
Uh-huh.
of the kids is curious and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you
Mm.
answer him?
I be in the room with people. I am in the room and I listen without judgment. I listen with curiosity until people can listen to themselves with less judgment and more curiosity.
Wow, that's deep. What did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
Oh, I wanted to be Perry Mason. I
Okay,
wanted to be a criminal lawyer.
okay.
I grew up in Washington, D.C. Everybody, lots of people grow up where blue collar is work clothes, right? Uh, and Brooks Brothers suits were work clothes to me. My dad was at the Treasury Department, and I saw everybody in, ties and white shirts and suits, and I wanted to be a lawyer when I grew up. I thought I would do good deeds in the world that way.
So, how did you get to where you're at? Take me back to your childhood, and what were the foundational seeds that were planted that diverted you from a life in law that got you into psychotherapy? How did all of this kind of become and evolve into who you are?
It's a really good question. The story arc of my whole book really is a few very bad things happened to me as a kid that created tremendous anxiety, and there was no ground under my feet. And so I turned to binge eating and then to speed, because that solved the problem of the binge eating. And then that almost killed me when I was 19 years old. I almost died. And when I got out of the hospital, I hit the ground running. I didn't go back to college. I moved to Los Angeles and I lived instead of a gap year from college, I took a gap decade. And when I hit bottom and got sober, uh, I I had just gone back to college to finish my degree because I'd been in therapy for 5 years and nothing seemed to be helping because I drank away every insight I had. And uh, I graduated with my BA at 2.5 years of sobriety, and I didn't get into the poetry program at UC Irvine, which was the only MFA program in LA at the time. And so I literally got on my knees and said to the universe, what do you want? What will you have me do? And a voice, very clear and loud, said, call the Jung Institute, because I'd read Carl Jung as a kid. So I called the Jung Institute and said, what do I do? Because when I was a kid, you couldn't be a Jungian without being an MD. And I wasn't going to medical school, not with this mind. And so I called the Jung Institute. They said, go get a master's degree in clinical psychology. And so I did. And I was the only 12-step sober person in my cohort in graduate school. Everybody else was like the fixer. the brother or sister of me, or the mother or father of me, but I was the only me in grad school. And I learned the term wounded healer the first quarter. I just went, oh, that's what I am. I was wounded, and now I can help others.
Yeah.
And it's been an amazing ride. People say, don't you get bored hearing the same things from me week after week? And it's like, no, because we're always going deeper.
Yeah.
It's like, as a writer, every patient that I've seen is like a really good book. And I get to kind of co-author
Yeah.
parts of it by what questions I ask, or how I receive something that they've told me, and where we follow that in their journeys. And I'm honored to do the work that I do. And I get to use my poetic voice when I use it. I do a lot of hypnotherapy with people, and kind of storytelling therapy, where I'll tell a story about something that allows them to connect more deeply to something of their own.
It's interesting that poetry is such a part of your skill level because I've been writing poetry for a long time and I always muse that it's the poor man's therapy. Because
Yes.
it really is journaling, but it's more specific and kind of Twitter fuel because you got to get to it. You really have to like punch through all of the fog and get right to it. You're a flashlight in the dark. And I would figure in your line of work, that would have to be such a good volley of right and left brain to keep yourself healthy.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, you can't take someone somewhere you haven't gone yourself,
Yeah,
so my inner work has allowed me to be present for the deepest inner work of other people.
yeah. So who's been a hero for you? Who's been an inspiration for you in your life?
Well, when I was young, my heroes were Dylan Thomas, E. E. Cummings. Um, and I was asked once if I had a female role model. And for years, I really didn't have anybody that I modeled myself after. Probably the theorists, the neo-Freudian theorists that talked about the inner baby and the infant's experience, because that's really where my trauma began, and that I didn't understand. Karen Horney wrote a, a letter to a patient once, talking about how you lose a self in a very secret and sneaky way as a child, when you're not approved of as who you are.
Yeah,
They want you to be different. And therefore, when they reject your true self, you begin to reject your own self. And so, finding the true self within me and helping other people give voice to their own became the heroic act. And finding the baby was something that happened after I was about 7 years sober, and I'd just gotten my license. I was on vacation in Kauai to celebrate when Hurricane Iniki hit. Hurricane Category 4 hurricane ripped every leaf off the entire island, and it was terrifying. And from that night on, I had horrible nightmares of being held hostage and not being able to get away. And so I went for hypnotherapy, and we went into the hurricane. And instead of a hurricane, what I was in a baby's body, with my father standing over me yelling. And this was around the time when everybody was talking about false memories and how hypnosis can give you fake memories. So I called my mom and said, did Daddy ever yell at me on the changing table? And there was this long pause. And then she said, how could you know that? And then over the years, I very kindly and curiously begged her to give me stories of my infancy. She got really sick and couldn't breastfeed me anymore. And the only milk in the house that my dad was heating up, he spilled cigarette ashes in it.
mm,
Hence the name of my book, Ashes in the Milk,
wow.
because he went ballistic. He was from Brooklyn. Everybody from Brooklyn yells. If you know anybody from Brooklyn, they all yell.
My dad was born there.
Okay, we're all adult children of people from Brooklyn. You understand? You got
Oh
yelled
man,
at.
do I ever?
You got called pinhead as an affectionate term, right? You pinhead. Oh my God, yes. So uncovering that and getting that daddy's rage out of my body, giving it back to him was so powerful. And I couldn't have done it without the excavation and without the poetic prompts that said, just write about this or just write about that. And the unconscious would then unspool and give the information about how when my dad yelled at me, part of me flew off and disappeared, right? I was in a writing workshop and I said, oh, that baby's dead. That baby died. And my teacher said, that's too convenient. It's frozen. You have to bring it back to life. And so
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing. I'm still doing it.
I was thinking the other day about, I'm 51, I'll be 52 here soon. And I was just thinking about how I've had to protect that little version of me for a long, long time. It's just kind of, it I don't almost kind of like that painting, like it's so cocooned within you can't see a figurine out of it because it's trying to protect itself. You're protecting it. And I've never thought about that ever before, and I don't know. There's weird things that are coming to my head at midlife now because when the sun starts setting, you start seeing things in a different way. You're not looking at, oh, well, this is going to be the big thing that's going to happen. You're just kind of trying to tie some things up and hope for what's going to happen in the second half. So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yes. There's a wonderful Jungian analyst in Washington, D.C. named James Hollis, who did a series of talks called Through the Dark Wood,
Yeah.
which is from Dante's Inferno of when I was 33. That was midlife back then. I entered the dark wood. And he asks these beautiful questions about what governs you? What has governed you in the first half of life? And do you want it to continue to govern you?
Yeah.
And so you're asking the right questions at the right time in life. Um, you know, back when I was a kid, Arthur Miller wrote a play and he had a quote on my writer's wall that said, 30 is an emergency.
Yeah.
The last time when you can stand at the peak of your life and look down at your past and look down at your future and make decisions.
Yeah.
And as we've lived longer, we're now living up to 100 and 105. 50 is an emergency, 60 is an emergency, even 70 is an emergency
Yeah.
in terms of what choices do we want to make in order to live our lives forward. And we're so fortunate that we get choices.
Yeah.
We're not living in a encampment in Yemen. We're so fortunate to live in a relatively safe world
Yeah.
compared to so many people.
For sure. So I'm curious if you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would it be? Who would you love to spend time with?
Who's living right now?
Well, I mean, we could open it up to the ghosts. We can do both ways.
Ah, I'm pretty sure it would be Carl Jung.
Okay.
I would love to share some of my dreams with him
Yeah.
and unfold them, animate them, bring them alive uh, with the original thinker.
Yeah, that would be cool. So let me ask you this. You
Uh-huh.
have to give a lot of yourself every day for your clients. It's a lot. It's not just a regular job. But you also have to hold back because you have to evolve as a human. What is that daily gumption for you to do this work and to evolve as a human and be who you are?
Well, I'm really structured. People call it discipline. I call it backing out of hell. Okay. I get up in the morning, I feed the dogs, I make a cup of coffee for us, and I meditate and I do yoga. I don't miss a day. I have a structure to my day that includes a ton of self-care up until 1:30 in the afternoon. And then I'm able to give care to others. When I was about 10 years into the 12-step programs, I hit a bottom as an entrepreneur. I had 3 businesses, private practice, vitamin store, and an art therapy studio. So I took myself to a 12-step program for business owners and closed one of the businesses and learned how to have fun. And for the last 28 years, I've had horses in my life.
Yeah.
And those horses have given me a grounding and a center and an identity as a cowgirl. And I don't know, I always thought of myself as like a girl version of Clint Eastwood in a cowboy movie,
Yeah.
out there alone in Malibu riding my horse. And it's given me a center to be big enough on the inside to be there for me, and then be big enough to hold whatever anybody else says and receive it, synthesize it with them, and give it back to them.
So as a writer, and obviously as a lover of books, what was the first book that you read that really was seminal in your development that made you either want to read more or become a writer?
Well, it's funny because the first book that came to mind was the first book I ever read, which was Are You My Mother? Which was about a little duck or whatever that was looking for its mom. And that kind of speaks to the inner child.
Yeah.
But it was really reading Dylan Thomas in 10th grade. Uh, Fern Hill, hearing him read it. And then from Fern Hill going to Kurt Vonnegut, who
Yeah.
spoke in a plain spoken voice. And I love plain spoken poetry. Well, one of my teachers, Jack Graves, called it writing poetry to be read and sung, where you have that big Martin Luther King, I have a dream voice.
Yeah.
And coming from that place with a combination of sort of Dylan Thomas and Kurt Vonnegut,
Oh yeah.
it
Wow.
just a lot of earthiness and a lot of magic, a lot of magic.
Absolutely. I will never forget right before I had my son, it was in my 30s. I remember going into the kitchen to make coffee in the morning, and I always have a radio going, and I think NPR was going or something at the time, and Kurt Vonnegut had died, and they were saying how Kurt Vonnegut never believed in God, but if he did, it was because music was on this planet, and I will never ever forget that. But
Yeah,
I remember when I was in college, my friends and I used to always get together and have coffee, and one of my good friends was a huge Vonnegut fan, and I wasn't really familiar with them, and quickly I got acclimated. And we had this dream, and I think it was based on a couple kids that tried to do it. They try to drive up to Cape Cod and craft five of the best questions in the world and go to his doorstep with a pack of Pall Malls and say, "What do you say?" And we really were going to think about doing that. And it was either going to be get the hell out of my face or come on in, let's do it, and we were willing to risk it. But yeah, you just unearthed a whole bunch of butterfly dreams of that era. So and that was quite an era though. I mean, a lot of what Dylan was doing and a lot of what a lot of those thinkers were doing, I have a jazz radio show and I interviewed a bass player named Chuck Israels and he was with Miles and he was in those cauldrons of jazz. And I was like, were you guys cognizant of the eye of the hurricane that you were in, the creative vortex that was creating all of these pages that are monolithic in the way that we see literature and life? And he was like, absolutely not. We were just literally just, we are bumblebees flopping around from flower to flower.
yeah. But the
So,
zeitgeist carries us.
yeah.
The creative zeitgeist carries us. Cummings was the first poet to use lowercase letters.
Uh-huh.
He was dialing into the same zeitgeist as like Picasso doing cubism
Yep.
and saying, I'm taking things apart, which was the drumbeat for the decline of civilization. That we're still in this weird struggle to not decline
Yeah.
as the earth struggles with her climate.
So are you hopeful for humanity as we move forward? I mean, I think there's a level of me that's hoping that we've entered some level of enlightenment that we're not aware of right now because we came out of a pandemic. But what do you think?
Well, I think we haven't processed the pandemic thoroughly enough.
Right.
I think we hit the ground running like we do for most traumas, and that is coming to bite us on the butt when it comes to teenage health, mental health, and things like that. But yeah, I'm hopeful. I have this sense that in the core of us, even the most wicked have a seed of hope,
Yeah.
and we were all children. My book is dedicated to everyone who was ever a baby. And I really think that when you look back on even the most reprehensible people, they were children too. And things happened that shaped them. My motto is always that Congress needs a few good therapists instead
Yeah.
of lawyers.
Yeah.
We need to understand the system in which we live and how addicted we are as a society to pleasure and avoiding pain rather than learning how to process pain and have it be meaningful. I made the pandemic into alchemy for myself. I created gold inside myself
Yeah.
by diving inside instead of pointing my finger outside at everything everybody was doing wrong, which seemed like a huge part of what people were doing because they were so anxious.
Yep.
My orientation is always when you're anxious, lean in,
Yep.
sit on the edge. You know, there was a great line in Apocalypse Now,
Hmm.
the couple of film,
Hmm.
when Brando says, it's like being a snail on a razor blade. You can neither go forward nor backward. And I feel like that's where we've been in the pandemic is like people want to go forward and move on, but they haven't dealt with the fact that they're on a razor blade,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so you go forward a little bit and it hurts, and you slide backward and a little bit and it hurts. And I'm just hoping that, especially with the coming election, that we can find the middle again. We've been
Absolutely.
so far out on the edges. I'm just hoping for mm, the middle. Just
Yes.
like Buddha said,
Yep.
it's not about the extremes. It's about how do we come to the middle ground?
Yep. It's interesting you were talking about children. I'm thinking about poetry. And Bukowski once said, "We're born geniuses and buried idiots."
I
Because
love him.
I know I do too. And it's like we do all of these walls get up. And when you lose that wanderlust, it's like you trade in a part of that freedom that's so vital to us feeling the sunshine. It's so it's so essential.
No, it's so true. I read a meditation once that said, my daughter asked me what I did when I went to work at the university, and I told her that I taught art. She said, "You mean they forget?
There you
Like they
go.
have to learn it all over again?"
Yeah, I think instead of people going to get a master's degree or like a PhD, they need to go back to kindergarten. That's where you learn it all, you
Yeah.
know? So so I'm curious of everything that you've done and accomplished and become in your life. And you obviously have overcome trauma and grown into to all of these accolades and evolution. What are you the proudest of?
There's a few things, but one of them is staying married
Yeah.
and diving deeply into the feelings that arise when somebody displeases me, and knowing I call it my father psychosis, where I'm back as a baby and my dad is yelling at me and everything is terrible. And how do I work my way through that? So I'm really proud of that. And I'm also proud of parenting a horse for 25 years, uh, growing up together. He died a couple of years ago this month, and I'm proud. I'm so proud. The way that people are proud of having children. I had horses, and I'm really proud that I showed up for that when it was so scary to do. And I still show up for it on a friend's horse, always scared, and then moving through the fear into being strong enough and big enough to show up.
I lost my dog last November, and my wife was asking me after it happened, like during the process, like, why aren't you grieving more? And I grieve in a different way. Men are weird and we need space and go out in the woods sometimes. But I just said that the fact that wherever and however in the cosmos this dog made its way to me and we got to share this existence together. And it's like your horse. We literally from A to Z lived this existence that was so good. There was nothing at all, but we loved each other. And we got to see that from start to finish. You don't get that often. And it's not some weird premature thing because we're going to outlive our pets. But the fact that that orb of light came into my existence and the only thing that I was in control of that whole time was loving it the best I could. That's it, and it happened and we get to move on and that's it. So it's a great thing. It's a great thing about being alive is just recognizing that celebrating the birth is just as important as celebrating the end.
Yes. So true. I'm sorry for your loss.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I made a sticker of her, and I put them on when I travel. I put it on poles. It says "Long live Coco," and I'm just keeping that spirit alive. It's a kind of a part of what I do. But yeah, it was a great life. So I'm curious if you had a dream tonight, ran into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've gained. What advice would you impart, and would she listen to you?
Don't run away. Don't run away. You know, we have a saying in 12-step programs that fear, it's okay to cuss on here, right?
Oh yeah,
Fear stands for fuck everything and run.
yeah.
And I ran. My 18-year-old self didn't stop running until she was 31. And I wish that I could have had someone or told her, sit still and learn from what's happened to you. Go inside. There's nothing outside of you that is going to make this better. No drink, no drug, no man, no success, no friends, no nothing. Nothing is going to make this better than going inside and knowing thyself.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, clients, everyone around you in your orbit, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm a ball of anxiety. I'm a ball of anxiety that I channel into creativity. And so people always say, Valerie, you're so calm. And I'm thinking, calm. You know how a duck looks like on the water and it's just sitting there floating, and down below are these
Oh,
little
it's
legs
just
going.
going crazy.
That's pretty much me. I have this free associating mind that has so much fun. It's sort of like a female version of Robin Williams, just free associating from topic to topic to topic to topic to topic and having fun with it.
Yep.
And 90% of what I think I can't say out loud because nobody's here to just engage that and enable it. But I have so much amusement in the movie of my mind.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so, yeah.
So if you could get into a time machine, we get off this call and a time machine pulls up, and you could go anywhere in human history and see one event with your own eyes. Where are you going? Now, it won't affect any, it won't be a ripple, it won't be like Back to the Future. It'll merely be you being an observer and you get to see it happen.
God, that's so weird. I'm just going to say the first thing that came into my mind because
Yeah.
I'm not going to edit it. Would have been liberating Auschwitz.
Yeah.
It would have been if I had gone in as a nurse or whatever, if I was a female, to go back and debrief people out of that kind of trauma. I
Yeah.
feel like that would have been my calling,
Wow.
you know, to hold the space
Yeah.
for suffering. I feel like that's somehow my calling in this life is to hold the space.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anyone wants to get your book, they want to reach out, they want to learn more about you, any of the good business, where do they go?
Uh, um, Valerie Johns at me.com, Johns, no O-N on the end, Johns at me.com. I'm on Instagram as Valerie Johns LA. Ashes in the Milk has its own Facebook page. On TikTok, I think as Ashes in the Milk. Can't remember. I haven't done a lot on TikTok yet. I'm just starting to learn how to do videos and
Yeah.
stuff like that. It's kind of fun reading the
Yeah.
book out loud in my pajamas,
Yeah.
like everybody else.
Technology's fun. We're at a really weird, fun precipice of time,
Exactly,
you know?
exactly. And so yeah, and let's see. Oh, the book is available right now as an ebook on Amazon and Barnes and everywhere else. It's coming out in soft cover on the 27th of this month, so next week.
Okay.
So pre-sales are a big deal. That's why I'm chatting it up now. But yeah, it's available. And my second book should be out sometime next year. I'm writing a second Pandemic Dreams book.
Very cool. The one thing I did during the pandemic is I ramped up my interviews, and you might find this interesting just because of overcoming childhood things. I was like, I'm going to go after all the legends. They're going to be home, they're going to have latitude. And I got a hold of Diane Shure, who really gigged hard with like Frank Sinatra and all the big names, is a woman, and she was partially blind. So I get a hold of her, and her cat was all over during the interview, meowing, and she's making coffee. And at that point in my interview life, I was like, all the ambient noise is great. Bring it on. Let's do it. This is life. This is what we're
Uh,
doing. She tells me a story, and this is probably one of the most profound things that happened because I did hundreds and hundreds of interviews. And she told me the story about how when after she was born, her mom didn't stay with her and she was in an over oxygenated incubator, and that's how she lost her sight. And I was just like, oh, wow. Like it was just one of those moments where it was like everything was radio silence. But it's amazing how that time period, like you say, these visions and dreams, how much was awakened. Because I kept thinking, my son's on the spectrum, and the two things that he loved the most when this began was school and baseball, and it was gone. And I was in denial. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that things had to be done. So and I have a stepdaughter too. I let them listen to my interviews and just really got immersed in all these positive voices because the jazz community is a very positive, overwhelmingly, triumphantly powerful community of people that don't flaunt ego. They're very grounded. I mean, from Sonny Rollins all the way down. So anyway, that I was just thinking about the pandemic thing and the stories, and that was one of the more stark ones. And it was, but she was such a great soul, just such a great person, and just so thankful for everything she had. So it was good. It was just one and hundreds of vignettes of triumph that happened during that time. So yeah, it was good.
well, that pain, that infant pain can be an incredible driver
Yeah,
of creativity.
yeah, yeah. And I have no doubt it was for her. So I got to know, final question. It's the greatest thing about living in Los Angeles, California.
Oh, the ocean and the mountains on Pacific Coast Highway when there's no traffic. To have both right here, waves waving in on one side and steep mountains on the other side. Um, yeah, and getting to ride horses out on a ranch. There's nothing like it. Nothing.
I'm jealous. I'm landlocked in Kansas City with no contour or anything. So I get it. Yeah. So
Land.
yeah, it's wonderful. So nice to meet you, Valerie. Thank you so much for your story. Best of luck. Keep doing the wonderful work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was
Yes, my
great.
pleasure.